All right. So, when we're talking about countries and how they kind of plan their moves on the world stage, you'd think it's all super carefully, laid out and planned out, right?
Yeah, like a chess game.
Like a chess game.
Yeah.
But what if some of this stuff that just kind of gets, those offhand remarks actually are hints about a totally different kind of strategy?
Interesting.
Today, we're diving into some pretty surprising ideas from a grand strategy expert. And they're saying some of those things that Donald Trump has said about the world.
Yeah.
The ones that seem a bit out there might actually be tapping into some really big changes happening all over the globe.
Yeah, I think we all remember some of those headlines.
Right.
And, kind of scratching our heads.
Yeah.
So what is this deep dive all about?
Well, it's really about looking again at some of those statements that at first, a lot of folks thought were just like blunders or just weird,
Right.
like Canada, the 51st state.
Oh, yeah.
Buying Greenland. And even bringing up the Panama Canal again. This expert is saying, hang on, these might not have been diplomatic screw-ups.
Right.
Instead, they could show a deeper understanding of how the world's power is shifting.
Like an intuition almost.
Almost like a gut feeling about these trends. Yeah.
A gut feeling that maybe wasn't fully articulated.
Yeah, exactly. So remember how people reacted to those statements?
Oh, yeah.
It was mostly like, what is he doing?
A lot of, well, that's just Trump being Trump, right?
Yeah, that's just his style, right?
Exactly.
But the expert we're looking at is saying there's actually logic behind this expansionist energy, they call it. And it connects to some deep worries within the U.S.
Okay, so like anxieties about America's place in the world.
Exactly, and about all this global competition heating up.
Right. Because people want a strong leader, but they don't necessarily want to get dragged into forever wars or like another Cold War standoff.
Yeah, totally.
It's tricky, right?
It's a really tough balancing act. So how does a country like the U.S. show its strength and protect what it cares about in that kind of world?
Right. That's the big question, isn't it?
That's the big question. And, the expert actually makes this really interesting comparison to Nixon opening up to China.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I know, right?
Tell me more about that.
So the idea is Nixon had this reputation as being super tough on communism.
Right.
Right? So he could make a big move like reaching out to China without seeming weak.
Right.
And maybe Trump, who a lot of people see as wanting to pull back from the world, be less involved.
Right.
Maybe he's the kind of guy who could make these kind of bold moves on North America and people would actually go for it.
Interesting, because they see him as less interventionist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like people who are usually against getting more involved in the world might be more okay with these North American ideas coming from him.
Because it's closer to home.
Yeah, especially if it's all about this growing competition with Russia and China for resources and power in the Arctic. Oh, yeah, that's a hot topic right now.
It is, especially with climate change opening up the region.
Right.
So it's not just one thing that's driving this way of thinking. It's a whole bunch of global trends, right?
Exactly. The expert highlights 3 big ones.
Lay them on me.
All right, so first you've got this decoupling between the East and West.
Decoupling, like separating.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're splitting apart in terms of economics and technology.
Different supply chains and stuff.
Right, and, developing their own tech.
Okay.
Then there's this push for re-regionalization.
Okay, so like bringing things closer to home.
Exactly. Especially along north-south lines.
Like nearshoring, we hear that a lot.
Oh, that's the buzzword.
Yeah.
It's all about having resources and production closer to where you need them.
Makes sense.
And the third big trend, superpower competition.
Oh, yeah.
It's heating up big time.
Like everyone wants to be on top.
It's a race in everything.
Yeah.
Climate change, energy tech, AI, you name it.
So the U.S. is basically changing how it sees its role in the world. It's not just the big boss setting the rules anymore.
Right, they're not just the market maker.
Yeah, they're becoming a player in the game, a competitor.
Yeah, a market player. In a world with lots of powerful players, it's getting multipolar, as they say.
And everyone's kind of getting nervous.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this feeling of better grab what we can while we still can.
Get yours before someone else does.
Exactly. And the expert says this is playing out all over. Look at Russia pushing around in its neighborhood, China with its Belt and Road thing trying to lock down global trade, and India trying to be the big dog in South Asia.
Everyone wants their own sphere of influence.
Right. It's like a new kind of great game.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder what happens to those old alliances, like the U.S. and Europe.
Yeah, the expert calls it a conscious uncoupling.
Oh, wow, like a celebrity breakup.
Kind of. But in this case, it's about different priorities and maybe drifting apart.
Right, because if the U.S. is focusing more on North America,
then Europe might have to go its own way.
Exactly. And it's interesting, the expert compares this to Russia trying to rebuild its empire.
They're all trying to consolidate power closer to home.
Right. It's like a new kind of acquisitive rumbling in the West, but not with tanks and stuff.
More like economics and influence. Right?
Yeah, more subtle, but just as important. And then there's this whole idea of strategic debt.
Ah, yes. The argument that Europe and Canada haven't been pulling their weight on defense.
Right. They've been relying on the U.S., and the expert links this to the Greenland idea.
Like maybe Greenland could be some kind of payback.
Yeah, like compensation for all that defense the U.S. has provided. The idea is the U.S. could do more with Greenland than Denmark can on its own.
Develop it better, protect it better.
Exactly. And, the expert brings up this idea from The Economist about the EU maybe inviting Canada into its club.
Oh, yeah, after that trade deal with those South American countries.
Right, the Mercosur bloc. And the expert's point is, if that makes sense for the EU, why not something similar for the U.S., Canada, and Greenland?
It's all about closer ties, closer integration.
Yeah, and shared interests, right? Especially when you think about the Arctic. Canada and Greenland become even more important.
It's all about the Arctic.
The expert calls them the crown jewels of the Arctic, along with Alaska.
Nice.
Because as the ice melts, there's all this oil and gas and crucial minerals.
Like nickel, zinc, rare earths.
Yeah, the stuff we need for national security and clean energy.
Yeah.
And the big question is, can Canada and Greenland handle all that on their own?
Stand up to Russia and China.
Exactly. The expert doesn't think so. And then you've got China making moves in South America.
They're like the big player down there now, right?
Yeah, they're the main trading partner and investor for a lot of those countries. And the expert worries that China might basically suck those countries dry as they struggle with climate change.
Oh, wow. Exploit them.
Yeah, beggar thy neighbor, as they say. And what happens when those countries start falling apart?
People head north.
Climate migration straight to North America. And this is where the expert brings up this idea of a zone of turbulence.
Okay, a zone of turbulence. That sounds intense.
It is. It's this idea that we're entering a period of like decades of global instability because of all these different things happening at the same time.
Oh, man, give me the rundown.
Okay, so you've got birth rates dropping in rich countries, people getting older.
Okay.
Huge droughts in poorer countries.
Right.
AI shaking up the job market. And climate change making everything worse. It's like a perfect storm.
Yeah, no kidding. So it's not just about East versus West anymore.
No, the expert says climate change is forcing this north-south dynamic. The countries closer to the equator, they're going to get hit hardest.
Right.
More chaos, more instability, and they're going to need help from the stable countries up north.
So the expert is thinking maybe some kind of political integration north and south.
Yeah, almost like what happened with the EU.
Bringing in those former communist countries.
Right. The idea is to get ahead of the problem before it blows up in everyone's face.
So it's not just about being nice, it's about national security.
Exactly. You got to keep those problems from spilling over. And it's not just about politics either. There's this whole competition for brand loyalty.
Brand loyalty, what's that about?
It's like the superpowers are all trying to win over the growing middle class in those vulnerable countries down south.
Make them want to do business with you, buy your tech.
Yeah, exactly. The US, the EU, India, Russia, China, they all want to be the partner of choice.
Like a popularity contest?
Kind of, but with really high stakes. And the expert uses this really strong term to describe what's happening: empire building.
Wow, empire building. That sounds serious.
It is. The expert says the world is changing in a way that countries need to be more assertive about building their spheres of influence.
Like the good old days of empires.
Sort of, but with modern tools. And they point out that the tech companies are already doing it.
Like Google and Facebook and all those guys?
Yeah, they're building their own empires of data and users. And the expert suggests that maybe Trump's ideas weren't so crazy after all.
Like he was picking up on this empire building vibe.
Exactly. He wanted to make America not just better, but bigger.
More powerful, more influential.
Right. So it all comes back to this. Trump climate change, the Arctic demographics, AI, the fight for resources, it's all connected.
It's like a big puzzle.
Yeah, a puzzle with really high stakes. And the expert's point is that good grand strategy is about understanding these big historical trends and using them to your advantage.
Yeah, riding the wave instead of getting crushed by it.
Exactly. Expand your power, limit your rivals. That's the game. And right now we're in what the expert calls a super competitive moment.
Like everyone's scrambling for position.
Yeah, the expert says by the middle of the century, most of the world will be under the influence of one of the big players.
Oh, wow.
No more unclaimed territory. So what does that mean for the U.S.?
Yeah, what are we supposed to do?
The expert says the U.S. has to make sure that as much of the world as possible follows American rules and values.
Because we built the current system.
Right. The expert calls America the kernel code of globalization, like the foundation.
So what's our best move?
The expert has a pretty radical idea.
I'm listening.
Reopen the U.S. to new member states.
Whoa, add more states to the union.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate power move in this global brand war.
Because everyone wants to be part of a winner.
Exactly. And the expert suggests that maybe this is what patriotism will look like in the 21st century.
Not just being the best, but being the biggest.
Right. Making the country stronger by bringing in new partners. So think about it. The expert asks, do we want a world where Canada is buddy-buddy with the EU? Where Russia controls the Arctic?
And China runs Latin America.
Exactly. If we don't do anything, that's what we might end up with.
So Trump's crazy ideas, maybe they were just ahead of their time.
The expert thinks so. They see those ideas as a kind of grand strategy trying to prevent those bad outcomes.
So he was thinking big picture.
Yeah, really big picture.
Yeah.
And the expert gets specific, they say offer Canada like 18 Senate seats.
Wow.
And give Greenland a ton of money, like $57 billion.
To sweeten the deal.
Exactly. It's all about making the future, not just letting it happen. And it goes back to that north-south integration idea.
Yeah, because climate change is going to push people north.
Mass migration. It's going to be a huge issue. So maybe moving borders north and south is the way to handle it.
Be proactive instead of reactive.
Right. And the expert compares all this to Nixon opening up to China.
Something that seemed unthinkable at the time.
Exactly. And maybe in a few decades, Trump's vision will seem just as obvious.
So this expert is saying, don't dismiss those unconventional ideas too quickly.
They might just be the key to navigating this crazy new world.
All right, folks, lots to think about there.
Yeah, for sure.
So if you want more deep dives into the big ideas shaping the world, make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
We're here to make things clear.
New episodes every day.